In the year 1840, Massachusetts was a place where secrets were buried deeper than the bodies. Among the dense pine woods and fog-choked roads of Essex County stood a grey stone structure with iron-barred windows and doors that creaked like broken bones. Ashcroft Asylum. Officially, it was a place for healing, but everyone in town whispered a darker name for it, the House of the Hollowed. It was here that Latoya Baines, a 17-year-old orphan, was brought under the cover of night. The carriage wheels scraped against gravel as two men in black coats unloaded her. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She simply stared, vacant-eyed, unmoving, lips slightly parted as if forever whispering something only she could hear. Her skin looked too pale for the living, and her fingers twitched in a rhythm no one could explain. It was said she hadn't spoken since her parents died in a house fire 6 months earlier. But when Reverend Mathers approached to offer prayer, Latoya turned to him and murmured the words, "He never left the fire. He's still inside me." The Reverend recoiled. His hands trembled as he made the sign of the cross. The asylum's director, Dr. Harold Whitmore, was a man of science, stern and proud. He dismissed the girl's muttering as shock and hysteria. "She'll be silent by morning," he said. But that night, half the ward heard her screaming not in pain, but in laughter. A deep, masculine laugh, too low for a teenage girl, like something was using her throat. The next morning, one of the orderlies who had helped bring her in was found dead in the hallway, face frozen in terror, fingernails torn and bloody as if he had tried to claw his way through solid stone. Latoya? She was asleep in her cell, smiling. February 3rd, 1840. The ink in Dr. Harold Whitmore's journal began to smear as his hands shook. The physician, known for his cold rationalism, had always believed every affliction of the mind had a logical cause. But Latoya's arrival began to rot that belief from the inside. She was unlike any patient he had seen in his 20 years at Ashcroft. She rarely blinked. She never asked for food. Yet her body didn't weaken. Her pulse ran cold, faint, like a creature barely tethered to life. Nurses reported strange things. Mirrors cracking when she looked into them, books flying from shelves near her room, rats avoiding her cell entirely. Dr. Whitmore insisted on isolation. "What this girl needs," he said, "is complete severance from outside influence." And so they placed her in cell 9, a room no one used anymore. Not since the suicide of a patient named Samuel Greaves, whose last words were, "She's under the bed." Whitmore began documenting everything. Day 2, Latoya hummed in the night. Not a child's lullaby, but a funeral dirge in Latin. Day 4, her shadow no longer matched her movements. Day 6, she began whispering his name before he even entered the hallway. By day 8, something had changed in Whitmore himself. He no longer trusted the mirrors. He began covering them in cloth, muttering prayers he hadn't spoken since childhood. Staff found him alone in his study, chanting in tongues. When asked what he was doing, he whispered, "She's not the patient anymore. I am." Other doctors called it stress, but the head nurse, Margaret Ellery, confided to another, "He's not just unraveling, he's being pulled, like something's got him by the soul." The town outside began whispering about Ashcroft again, of smoke seen rising from the chimney at night, though no fire had been lit, of screams heard across the moors, and always, that name, Latoya. The last line in Dr. Whitmore's journal before he vanished. "She doesn't sleep. She watches. She remembers." Cell 9 had become a place the staff at Ashcroft Asylum refused to enter alone. Not after midnight, not even with lanterns, not even armed. They called it the whispering room, because that's what it did, whispered, and the voice wasn't always Latoya's. Nurse Margaret, the only one brave or foolish enough to step inside, described it like this: "The air feels thick, the temperature drops, and you hear things from your own past, people you've buried, secrets you've kept." She once walked in to find Latoya sitting cross-legged on the cold stone floor, eyes rolled back, reciting the names of everyone who ever worked at Ashcroft, including those long dead. When Margaret demanded to know how she knew those names, Latoya tilted her head and said, "They told me." When asked who they were, she simply replied, "The ones behind the walls, the ones waiting to get out." Word of Latoya's possession, or illness depending on who you asked, began to leak into the village. Father Jonas Mallory, a defrocked priest living in exile nearby, wrote to the asylum. He'd heard rumors, and he'd heard the name Baines before. He claimed to have met her mother once, on a mission in New Orleans, after an exorcism gone wrong. He wrote, "If this child is speaking in the old tongue, do not ignore it. That voice is not hers. It's the same voice that came through the mother, just before the fire." Dr. Whitmore never responded. He was gone. The asylum now operated in uneasy silence. Staff quit. Patients began screaming without reason. Shadows moved before the candlelight. One night, an attendant attempted to smother Latoya in her sleep, terrified she would open her mouth again. When he pulled back the blanket, she wasn't there. The room was empty, locked from the inside. 3 hours later, they found her on the 3rd floor in the abandoned children's wing, sitting in the lap of a rocking chair that hadn't moved in decades. She was humming. Behind her on the wall, a phrase had been scratched into the plaster, with fingernails. "He's almost here." Who was he? No one dared ask her, but they all felt it. Something had been invited in, something ancient, and it was using Latoya as the door. By mid-February, Latoya stopped speaking altogether, but she started drawing. Every morning, Nurse Margaret would find her hunched over scraps of parchment, charcoal smudging her pale fingers, lost in a trance. The drawings were always the same. A house, not the asylum, not any known structure in Massachusetts. No, this house was wrong. Crooked, too many windows, a door that bled shadows, and every time she drew it, more detail would appear, as if she remembered more of it with each passing day. A weather vane shaped like a serpent, a porch rotting in reverse, curtains drawn but eyes still visible behind them. One staff member, a groundskeeper named Elias, made the mistake of burning one of her sketches. That night he was found wandering the eastern field, barefoot in the snow, eyes bleeding, mumbling the same thing again and again. The house came. It came for me. He was never the same again, never spoke a coherent sentence after that. Dr. Whitmore's replacement, Dr. Elizabeth Wren, a more progressive physician, believed Latoya's art might reveal repressed trauma. She decided to interview the girl directly, without guards, without restraints. That was the last anyone saw of Dr. Wren. 3 days passed. Her office remained locked. When the door was finally broken down, the room was completely empty. No sign of struggle, no broken glass, just one new drawing sitting neatly in the center of her desk. The same house. But this time, the front door was open. The staff panicked. They accused Latoya. She hadn't moved from cell 9 in days. She hadn't spoken. She only stared right at them, with a small smile on her lips. Not malicious, not joyful, but satisfied, like a puzzle piece had snapped into place. And there was something else. Every copy of her drawings now showed a figure standing in the open doorway. Tall, inhuman, with no face. Just a blank oval where the eyes, mouth and nose should be. When Nurse Margaret asked her who it was, Latoya finally spoke again. Just 3 words. "He's inside now." That night, doors slammed on their own. The power, what little of it they had, flickered and failed. The chapel's crucifix fell from the wall and shattered. The patients screamed in unison, and through the thin stone walls of Ashcroft, the staff could hear it. Not a growl, not a voice, but breathing. Deep, slow, patient. Something had arrived. The deeper Ashcroft staff looked into Latoya Baines, the less they found. No parish birth certificate, no school enrollment, no census record in all of Essex County. It was as if she simply appeared the day her parents died in that fire, a fire with no known cause, no official report, and no survivors. But one janitor, old Thomas Riggs, remembered something the others didn't. He'd worked at St. Cecilia's orphanage in the 1830s. A brutal place. One night he whispered to the night nurse, "That girl, she ain't new. I saw her once before, in 33. She hasn't aged a day." His warning was ignored, until he was found crushed inside the records vault, spine twisted backward, eyes still open. That's when Nurse Margaret broke the rules. She snuck into the restricted archives, a locked room beneath the east wing where old asylum cases were buried like corpses. Cobwebs lined the ceiling. The smell of mold and iron hung in the air. There she found a crumbling box labeled Case Number 715, Patient Unknown, 1833. The photo inside showed a girl in a white nightgown, head tilted, eyes hollow. It was Latoya, same face, same stare, same age. The intake notes were almost illegible, but one line stood out, scrawled in red ink. Refuses to die. Host must be purged by fire or containment. There were signs of a cover-up. Pages torn out, names blacked out, whole years erased. Margaret tried to show the file to the new chief medical officer, Dr. Griggs. But by the time she returned from her night shift, the entire archive room was gone, sealed behind brick as if it never existed. She screamed at the staff, demanded they listen, but the response was clinical, cold. There is no case number 717, you're overworked, take a week off. But that night, she received an envelope at her doorstep, unmarked. Inside, a single photograph. Latoya, standing in front of that same crooked house, now more detailed than ever. A second figure had appeared beside her. This one was Margaret. The eyes scratched out, the mouth sewn shut with ink, and scribbled in shaky handwriting on the back. You've been drawn. After the mysterious disappearance of the archive room, Margaret Ellery vanished for 3 days. She returned in the middle of the night, barefoot, soaked in rain, eyes glazed like glass, clutching the photograph of Latoya and herself. She couldn't remember where she'd been, just kept whispering, "The house isn't a place, it's a gate." Ashcroft's board declared her mentally unfit, but they never filed her discharge. She simply faded from staff records, like she'd never existed. Meanwhile, something was wrong inside Ashcroft's West Wing, the hallway that housed Cell 9. Walls began to warp, lights flickered even during the day. Patients who passed near the door began scratching their own faces. One screamed for hours, "There's a hollow in the room eats." When staff opened Latoya's cell, they found it empty, but not abandoned. Inside was a small mound of earth, a circle of soot, and a mummified cat, positioned as if bowing before something unseen. They moved her to another room, but the hollow followed. A void. That's the only word nurses could use to describe it, a feeling that something was there, just outside human senses, like being watched through wet gauze. Then came the incident with patient Hargrove. He'd been at Ashcroft for decades, catatonic, motionless. But one night, he sat up in bed and said a single word, Latoya. His vitals spiked. He screamed, clawed at his throat, and began to vomit dirt, thick, black, like grave soil. Before he died, he left a warning scratched into the wall with his nails. She brings the room with her. The hollow walks. Dr. Griggs, desperate to regain control, called in Father Elias Monroe, a retired exorcist from Boston. He'd seen horrors during the Salem aftermath, things not written in church records. Elias entered Cell 9 with nothing but holy water, incense, and a crucifix. He came out 15 minutes later, bleeding from the ears. His only words? That girl didn't let something in. She was what got out. After that, the decision was made to sedate Latoya daily, keep her unconscious, keep the hollow asleep. But it was too late. Ashcroft had already been touched by her, by whatever walked through her. And as the walls began to sweat and the floorboards pulsed like veins, the staff understood one terrifying truth. Latoya wasn't the one locked inside the asylum. Ashcroft was the one locked inside her. After Father Elias's failed attempt, the asylum fell into a silence thicker than ever before. The walls no longer whispered, they listened. Latoya remained sedated, but the building itself had changed. Nurses heard scraping beneath the floorboards, not rats, not plumbing. Something pacing, waiting, breathing. Then came the night Nurse Hallie dropped her rosary just outside Latoya's room. When she bent to retrieve it, she froze, her ear almost touching the ground, her eyes widened. She whispered, "Someone's praying beneath us." But the words are backward. The next day she went home and nailed her own lips shut with sewing pins. She never returned. Doctors examined Latoya's cell. The floor beneath her cot had cracked. A fine mist of black soot leaked from it. The temperature in that room was consistently 8 degrees colder than the rest of Ashcroft. When a maintenance man tried to reseal the floor, he found no bottom beneath it, just a black shaft descending into nothing. He dropped a match. It never hit anything. They called in Dr. Malcolm Berrin, a geologist and skeptic. He scanned the room with his instruments. "This isn't Earth," he muttered. "There's no record of this kind of formation in the region. This depth shouldn't exist here." On his final day at Ashcroft, Berrin set up a recorder near the crack and left it running overnight. The next morning, he was gone, his bed unslept, his notes burned. Only the recorder remained. When played back, the tape was mostly static until the 3:07 a.m. mark. That's when a voice began whispering. Slow, raspy. It wasn't English, but linguists later confirmed the tongue. Pre-Christian Sumerian, an ancient language that predated written scripture. And the phrase repeated over and over was, "She is the gate, she is the gate, she is the gate." The staff tried moving Latoya again, but every room she entered cracked open so, beware. Ceilings bled black mold. Water turned brackish. Staff grew ill, first mentally, then physically. One orderly gouged out his eyes, claiming, "The walls dream in symbols I cannot unsee." Dr. Whitmore began keeping a journal, filled with frantic sketches, spirals, serpents, and a child with 7 black eyes. And Latoya? She hadn't spoken a word in weeks, but her lips moved while she slept, mouthing the words, "You open the gate. I am the welcome." The horror was no longer confined to the room or even to her. Ashcroft itself was now infected, a breathing cathedral of madness. And something far older than Latoya had found its way in. The asylum's atmosphere had changed, not just metaphorically but literally. The air in the West Wing grew heavier, as if submerged under invisible water. Lamps flickered, and the light bulbs, new inventions at the time, shattered for no cause. Latoya's presence was no longer just passive. She had become magnetic. Those who entered her room left different. Blank stares, jittering limbs, sudden nosebleeds, and in one case, a nurse who spontaneously began speaking Aramaic, despite never studying a word of it. And then came the scratching from beneath the floor, rhythmic and relentless, every night at 2:41 a.m. without fail. Dr. Whitmore, desperate for understanding, ordered a full excavation of Latoya's cell. Against every warning, they broke through the crack. Beneath the surface wasn't dirt. It was stone. Carved stone. Ancient, worn smooth as if by thousands of fingers. Covered in symbols, spirals, and a repeated mark that resembled a keyhole set inside a bleeding eye. The workers didn't return the next day. One slit his wrists, another boarded a train to nowhere and was never seen again. That same night, a low hum began resonating through the asylum. It came from the stone gate beneath Latoya, a vibration so deep it could be felt in the bones, like a frequency not made for human ears. Patients began speaking in unison, reciting verses of unknown origin. One old man, previously mute for 17 years, screamed, "It's waking! You fools! The child was a seal, not a soul." And then Latoya sat up, fully, eyes still closed, head tilted upward, arms out, palms facing the ceiling. Around her, the walls cracked open, black mold spreading like veins, mirrors shattered, though none were in the room. In the central hall, every clock struck 2:41 a.m. simultaneously, and then froze. Her mouth moved, but the voice that emerged wasn't hers. It was deep, plural, and ancient. "We were bound by prayer, sealed in silence, but your curiosity unmade the pact." Dr. Whitmore fell to his knees, clutching his ears, bleeding, crying, laughing. "The gate isn't beneath her," he whispered. "She is the gate. She always was." In that moment, all electric devices failed. Flames erupted from gas lamps, and from beneath Ashcroft, the ground breathed in. Not out. In. As if something below had finally awakened. Something that had waited beneath the soil of Massachusetts for longer than any grave, any church, or any god. Latoya opened her eyes, now pitch black with flickering gold inside, and said her first words in days, "Welcome back." Ashcroft Asylum was no longer just a place for the mentally broken. It had become a beacon for something older than madness. Since the breach below Latoya's room, the building itself seemed to shift. Hallways stretched longer, doors opened to nowhere, windows reflected things that weren't standing there. Father Caldwell, a seasoned exorcist brought in from Boston, stepped onto the property 3 days after the incident. He never removed his coat. "The soil here," he whispered. "It's already been claimed." He refused to touch Latoya. He wouldn't even look at her. He placed 13 crosses around her room, each carved from ash wood soaked in holy water from Jerusalem. Within hours, they blackened and cracked. Latoya began to change. Her voice now alternated between herself, a weeping old woman, and a laughing child. At times, all three spoke at once. "It was never about me," she whispered to a nurse. "It's about you. All of you. Ashcroft is the altar." At exactly 3:03 a.m., the screaming started. Every patient, those who could speak and those who hadn't uttered a sound in years, began howling in unison, forming an unearthly chorus. Their cries followed a pattern, a chant. "The gate is open, the veil is thin, let the flesh remember sin." Ashcroft's walls bled, not metaphorically. Actual blood oozed from the cracks in the plaster. The blood was warm and old. Father Caldwell made a final attempt. A mass was held in the central chamber with every religious symbol represented: Christian, Jewish, Islamic, pagan. A symbolic unity of faiths. Latoya only laughed. "They've already eaten your prayers. You built your walls on their bones." Suddenly, the floor in Latoya's room split wide open, revealing a black pit, bottomless, breathing, exhaling a rotten wind that made grown men fall to their knees and weep like children. From it came voices, not loud, but close, too close. "Oh, Nebby-1." Doctors began seeing things behind their reflections, hearing their own thoughts echoed back at them in voices that weren't theirs. 3 Asylum staff members committed suicide in the same hour. Dr. Whitmore tried to flee, but when he turned the asylum's main key to unlock the gate, it snapped. There was no exit. The building had sealed itself, a prisoner of its own sin. The town of Ashcroft went silent. Families who had members inside received no letters. Deliveries were refused at the gates by ashen-faced orderlies who never spoke. Father Caldwell vanished the night after the failed mass. Only his Bible was found, open to a page that had been ripped out. After the floor in Latoya's room cracked open, Ashcroft Asylum descended into a chilling silence. Not peace. The silence of prey just before the predator strikes. No more screams, no more chants, just stillness. A dead, suffocating quiet that stretched across every corridor like a funeral shroud. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring and your soul recoil. Inside the asylum, only 6 people remained alive. Dr. Whitmore was one of them. He documented what he saw in a small leather journal, every page scratched with frantic handwriting, blotted with blood, sweat, and ink. It wasn't just a diary, it was a confession. "Latoya is not possessed," he wrote. "Possession is too kind. She is the key, and we are the ones who unlocked her." The townsfolk of Ashcroft noticed something wrong. Even the birds stopped flying near the property. Horses refused to pass the main road. Children cried at night, pointing to windows that were too far away to see. A local boy disappeared after tossing a rock at the asylum's gate. All they found was his cap, soaked in warm blood. Then came the black fog. It started as a thin mist creeping out of Ashcroft's chimneys. Soon it blanketed the fields. Farmers abandoned their land. Even the priest, Father McDonough, fled the town with nothing but a crucifix and a broken rosary. Rumors began to spread in nearby villages that Ashcroft was cursed, that a demon had been born, or worse, released. And still, inside the building, Latoya smiled. She hadn't eaten in 12 days. Her body should have wasted, but instead, her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, like a coal slowly coming alive. Dr. Whitmore heard her speak one last time, clearly, calmly. "It's not me anymore. It's what was waiting for you, behind the veil." Ashcroft fed it. That same night he saw what he could only describe as a mirror that breathed. On the other side of T, he swore he saw the staff, the patients, himself, but twisted, bleeding, laughing with broken teeth. He tried to burn the asylum down. He failed. The walls absorbed the fire, swallowed the smoke. Nothing left. Nothing could die here anymore. By morning, Ashcroft had vanished from local maps. Government records erased its existence. Only whispers remained. After Ashcroft Asylum disappeared, literally wiped off maps and minds, only a handful of people knew it ever existed. Fewer still remembered Latoya Baines. Among those who survived the final night was Dr. Harold Whitmore, though he would later be declared legally insane. He was found wandering naked in the swamps of Essex, repeating a single sentence. "The house isn't gone. It just turned its face away." They locked him in Danvers State Hospital, where he scratched endless spirals into the walls with his fingernails until they bled. He died of starvation, though food was left in his cell daily. The rest of the asylum staff? Gone. No records, no bodies, no obituaries. And then came the real horror, the cover-up. State officials claimed Ashcroft never existed. They said the land had always been barren, too unstable for construction. But villagers remembered the building. They had seen the asylum with their own eyes. They remembered the carriages, the screams, the black fog. But over time, even those memories faded. Some say the government sent a team of scientists to collect Latoya's body. Some say they were priests. Others say they were neither. Just men in grey coats who spoke in dead languages and carried machines no one had ever seen. Whatever happened, the official narrative became law. There was no girl named Latoya Baines, no Ashcroft, no deaths. But deep within Harvard Medical School, in a restricted wing, lies a single locked drawer. Inside is a vial labeled Subject LB. Sample 4C, mirror skin residue. It pulses faintly, as if still alive. A janitor once opened the drawer by accident. 3 days later, he gouged out his own eyes and wrote, "She's coming through," on the walls of the men's restroom, in his own blood. They closed the wing. The only person who ever tried to publish a report on Ashcroft, Dr. Ellen Norwood, was found drowned in her own bathtub. Her last email simply read, "It wasn't just one girl, it was the first breach." Still, whispers persist in university basements, in secret Masonic archives, and among old nurses who once treated unclassified patients in the 1860s. They say Ashcroft was never built to cure the insane. It was built to trap something. And Latoya? She wasn't the beginning. She was the warning. In the years after the non-existent Ashcroft Asylum vanished, the land became wild again, overrun with thorn bushes, whispering trees, and a silence too unnatural for the living. But locals say something still breathes beneath the soil. Every 7 years, a child disappears near that land. Always a girl. Always the same age as Latoya was when she was brought in. Some are never found. Others are discovered in nearby towns, quiet, distant, staring at walls, whispering phrases in Latin, phrases no one taught them. In 1912, a group of spirit photographers captured a glass plate negative while camping near the ruins. When they developed the image, they saw a girl standing between 2 trees, black eyes, burned dress, a smile too wide for her face. The plate shattered on its own the next night. The lead photographer lost all his teeth in his sleep. They never returned. In 1968, a construction team unknowingly tried to build a communications tower on the Ashcroft site. By noon, all 7 workers quit. The foreman told his boss. The ground whispered. The air bled. When asked to clarify, he gouged his ears out with a screwdriver. They abandoned the project. And then, there's you, the viewer. You heard her name. You know her story. And now, you're part of it. The legend says anyone who speaks Latoya Baines 3 times in a mirror will see her, not as she was, but as she became, the vessel, the hollow. But here's the thing no one tells you. She's not trapped in a mirror. She's looking through it, even now, watching, waiting. Remember those doctors? They didn't forget her. They couldn't. The horror didn't die in 1840. It just slipped behind the veil, patient, watching, echoing, every whisper in the dark. Every flicker in your peripheral vision, every breath on your neck when you're alone, that's not your imagination, that's her. So if tonight, as you lie in bed, your lights flicker once, twice, and you hear distant laughter from a voice you've never known, do not turn around. Because some doors once opened never shut. And Latoya, she's already inside.